Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. We're live every week on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, leave us a Google review. And if you're watching on the socials, get involved in the conversation below. Our email address for any topics you'd like us to discuss is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. And there's a podcast version of the show every week as well on Mondays at 10 a.m. Wherever you get your podcasts from, simply type in Property Matters TV and you'll find it there. So let's take a look at this week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Paul. Good morning. Good morning to all of our viewers and listeners, wherever you are, and lots to chat about in property.
And the first story we're going to look at this week is 5 reasons why we're in a buyer's housing market. This is something that Rightmove actually published just before the budget. And because the budget came in, it kind of made me put this one on the back burner for a while. But I still think it's worth having a conversation because we're in the autumn selling season at the moment, in one of the busiest times of the year for the property market. There's lots of people use this time between the end of the summer holidays and the busy festive season to find their next home. And this year we've seen lots of activity, they say, with the number of sales agreed 29% higher than in the quieter market that we were seeing this time last year, and 17% more people inquiring about homes for sale. But while the market remains busy, we're by no means seeing the frenetic market we saw in the aftermath of the pandemic, when lots more people were looking to move than there were homes for sale. This year, would-be buyers are in a better position to take their time finding their home that's right for them at the right price. Tim Bannister from Rightmove says, with the ball in the buyer's court and the pick of the bag to choose from, sellers need to price competitively to find a buyer, particularly with affordability still very stretched. Some sellers appear to be acting on this caution, contributing to limited price growth and better buyer affordability. This is helping to keep the numbers of sales between agreed consistently and strongly ahead of the quieter market last year. So, pretty much straightforward stuff there, Joe. But you were saying to me before we started recording that actually it is still quite quiet, despite the fact that we're better than this time last year, because last year really was a bit of a car crash because of the mortgage rates.
That's right. Yes. It's interesting that the reasons why, but we always know, and we have discussed throughout our time, Paul, and generally over the years that I've been in the business, that there are 2 aspects: is a buyer's or seller's market, and in this case, we are in a buyer's market. Primarily, giving the option to buyers is much more choice. There's more stock available and different circumstances. It's genuinely, I suppose they want to talk the housing market up as much as they can, and therefore there is lots of data saying that it's busier, perhaps not as busy as this time last year, or even busier than this time last month, primarily because they want to keep it going in the right direction. But the process is so long, and the choice for buyers is much greater, especially when a lot of buy-to-let people decided that they want to sort of come out of the market, and therefore there's more stock readily available. The process itself takes quite a long time. Freehold, obviously, is a lot easier than perhaps some of the leasehold properties that they might be. And so with that in mind, it's not as fast as it is. But certainly a buyer's market, so good choice for buyers, more choice in types of properties, probably consider better offers, not drastically silly offers, but there are better offers. And you have to bear in mind that over the last 4 years, and if you took the pandemic years alone, the housing market went up by circa between 20 and 23%, depending where it was. So, there is room for people to negotiate down. It's just that we get used to that higher figure, and then you say to yourself, well, why should I take a drop? But actually, you forget that it's gone up in the last 4 or 5 years quite dramatically. And so, therefore, there is room to negotiate. But at the same time, it's a case of make sure that you price it keen if you're going to sell it. If you don't price it keen, then chances are you're going to sit around for a long time.
Interestingly, they say the first reason that they say it's still a buyer's market is that house price growth in October was still lower than average than it was previous to that. So they're still saying that's a good indicator of how confident sellers are feeling when they're putting their homes on the market. And obviously, you've got these instant valuation tools and so on, and you can obviously get an agent round to value the property for you. But what I'm finding, and I've, as you know, I've been in this market now for the last couple of weeks, probably about a month, and I'm finding that there are people where there's a little bit of work, even if it's just sort of domestic, simple, decorating, for example, but people are using that as a sort of rod to beat them with. And they're quite happy to take fairly substantial discounts on that. But when the home is really top notch and really being looked after, people are holding their price and getting their price.
Yeah, that's not a strange situation, Paul. It's been like that forever and a day. When you think about it, that you've got to do the sums. Now, if you're going to buy a property, let's say hypothetically £500,000 as a ballpark, and you decide that you see a property that needs quite a lot of work doing to it, you're only going to calculate what it's going to cost you to get that up to some level, some standard. Cost of building materials has gone up. Employing builders and getting a hold of a builder has gone up. So you're going to calculate that and you're going to say, well, actually, this could cost me another £30,000 to get it up to the level that I want to get it up to. I'm going to now make an offer of £470,000. On the other hand, you could end up having a property that is absolutely immaculate, and you then again do the same calculation. In fact, it's almost better to, in some cases, it depends on your time, age, where you are, what location, what kind of property it is, etc. You might find that actually, you know what, I don't want the headache of having the builders around for the next 3 to 6 months. Here it is, an immaculate property that serves my purpose. I can, almost unpack and start to do. Yes, there might be little titivating to do. There might be a room that is wrong color for you, or one of those scenarios, but that's okay to deal with. You could deal with that in sort of bite-sized pieces. But if you've got the major structure, the bathroom, the kitchen, the heating, the double glazing, the roofing, this meeting EPC C criteria, all of the boxes are ticked, then there's no reason why you shouldn't pay as much as the asking price, or perhaps maybe a bit more, depending on what the interest on that property is, because you also calculated that you're not going to spend another 30, 40, 50,000 pounds getting it up to that level. And also your own time. There's a price on your own time of managing that, apart from all of the headache that you might have within your own structure or family. You might not be able to go on holiday, or might not be able to, so all of those calculations do come into it. And then you say, well, actually, I'm going to pay that. But there's a human side of us that says, I've got to make an offer. It's just part of our DNA. And even if it was a price that you think, yeah, I'll pay for it, you still got to go in there and kick the tires and go, well, is this wrong? And there's that wrong. So I'll give you 10 grand off. And it's a good vendor or a negotiator that's going to, hold that fast and say, I've got 3 people, you pay the price, or you move on. So it is all about doing the calculation.
And these are the figures that Rightmove were talking about, so you can see on the screen here. And for the benefit of those on the audio podcast, September, the average asking price was 370,759, and that was up 8.8%, which is an annual change of 1.2%. But then in October, the price rose to 371,958, which is up 0.3%. So 0.5% slower growth on a monthly basis than there was in the preceding month. So they're still saying that sellers have to price accordingly. And this is the thing that I was thinking the other day. You kind of just, I'll offer another 5,000. I mean, it's almost like monopoly money, because the way that the prices have gone over so long, it's extraordinary, isn't it? Oh, just add another 5,000. But actually, that's 5,000 quid.
Yes, it is. And at the time, it feels like monopoly money, as you rightly say. But like I said earlier on, it's all about your own calculation. The question is that, okay, paying that 5,000 in the monopoly money, well, what does that actually mean in the long term? Well, in the long term, it probably means that you have a very nice 2 weeks holiday somewhere, hassle-free, and not have to worry about it, and think that I've done that, and therefore I'm actually living in the comfort of a house or a home that is already done and is comfortable for me. So I think it's just always about number. But like I said to you earlier on, it's that, we have that tire kicking mentality. We have to have a deal. We have to negotiate. You've got to ask the price. If you don't ask, you always feel, I've never asked. I could have maybe got 5 or 10, 15, 20 grand off. Maybe their circumstances were such. But at the same time, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, actually, you know what? I'd rather pay for the price because I could just do this. The next year, this is happening, and I won't need to spend my time doing this, that, the other, getting the builders round, getting the place upside down, and living in a hovel for the next 6 months. There's a price to pay for that, isn't there?
Yeah, indeed. And their third point is that the number of homes for sale now is actually 12% higher than a year ago. And in fact, the average number of listings per agent is at the highest it's been since 2014. So with more choice of homes, it also means that more competition is there between sellers eager to be the home that stands out on the property buyer's shortlist. And to that extent, yes, there is a lot more out there. And I guess that's also perhaps a reason why some sellers think, being a bit pragmatic, they're maybe talking to their agent frankly and saying, well, yours isn't really the standout property, so you're going to have to cut a deal.
Yes, and again, same thing. We go back to the scenario where agents would have priced it at a level, perhaps in order to win an instruction, but maybe not realistic enough. Then they have to sort of nurture that to a level where the sellers have to get realistic as they start to market, and they've been marketing. But these tools that we spoke about earlier, or you mentioned earlier on, are tools that nowadays are available, but that still does not give you the correct figure, because unless you walk in there and feel a place, you're really not going to be able to pinpoint that price. I mean, prices are based on, what something sold in the last XYZ, what the data says. But what we don't know is what's inside that property. Now, that property might have been, as you say, might have been an immaculate property. On the other hand, it might have been a property that needed doing up. And then you say, well, actually, my one is immaculate, and that one was sold for 10,000, 20,000 pound less. I want 20,000 pound more. And that can only happen when somebody walks through the door. But the problem with walking through the door is that when you have a number of people walking through the door, they will have their view of what they believe they can get. Now, to win an instruction, they might say, actually, I can put this on for X, Y, Z. And then you have to work your way back down. On the other hand, you might have a realistic. Now, if somebody's told you a realistic price, you're probably not going to accept it as a seller, because it's not your job to do that. You're going to say, well, actually, if he says it's only worth 450, I've got to have a go at 475, and then I'll come to 450 if that's what happens in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks. So either way, it's a game. Whether it's Monopoly or whether it's, any other game, it's still a game that has to be played.
Yeah, it's interesting actually to talk about valuation, because I know you do valuations. And the thing I was going to say was that, to what extent is it based on sort of square footage? Because I did see somewhat a relationship between square footage, say, 1,200 square feet versus 1,800 square feet. And there did seem to be, obviously, as you might expect, a difference in price as a result of that. But to what extent is it principally based on square footage, or is it the fact that there is a downstairs office, or there is an ensuite, or there's a large garden, for example?
Broadly, you can value something based on square footage, but again, it's the same thing, that the tools that are used, or the calculation that you might do. So let's say you say you got yourself a 2,000 square foot house, and so what did another 2,000 square foot house in that area sell for? First of all, you don't always get the size. But you'll have to go through the details, perhaps measure it up and get some idea. And was it a 2,000 square foot house? It might have been 2,200, it might have been 2,500, but it's in the same street. The difference is they might have gone into the loft, or as you say, they might have an office downstairs, or they've extended to the back. From the facade, you don't always get to know what's actually behind that front door. So yes, square footage can give you a guidance just as much as a valuation of similar properties that are sold within that area, when that street in the neighborhood can also give you an eye. But I'm a firm believer that the true value of it will actually be when you are walking in. I always find that a home, if somebody's looking to buy a home, they can wear a home. Now that sounds really silly, but let me explain that to you. Imagine that you've gone down the street and you've seen 3 homes, 3 houses. Some are houses and another is a home. You walk through and you just feel that it's snug, it feels right, it feels warm, it's the right thing. And then because it's the right home and you feel great about it, you will pay that price because that's how it is. But the one two doors away may have been a great house. It might have been the one that's done up, it's got the state of the art, but maybe it was too clinical when you walked in. It just didn't feel right. And I use this analogy in the terms of clothing, for example. So, as guys, we might go into a suit shop and find that there is, three suits of the same color, of the same size. You try them on, but one actually fits better than the other. There's no rhyme or reason for it. It's just that it fell on your shoulders and you went, oh, that's perfect. You try another one and you go, there's something not right with this. And so I've always used that as an analogy that if you walk through the front door of a home and it falls on you, you feel it's right, then that's a value that you can't put on it. It's a price you can't put on it because it's a price of comfort. It's a price of feeling happy. It's a price of that situation saying, well, that's a home that I'd like to live in, as opposed to this is a house and I've got to make it a home, if you can understand that.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, because obviously I've been, as I said earlier, going through this process recently, is the effect of the online portals, which, last time I did buy a house was when it was done through the newspapers, as we've often talked about on here. And you go through the newspapers and you go around there. And of course, because you've seen these tiny little window pictures in the newspaper that aren't printed particularly good quality back in those days, you go around and it's nothing like you imagined it to be. But my experience this time with the portals, I have to say, was really, really good in the sense that the pictures, yes, they're all taken wide angle lens, so the rooms always look bigger because that's the game you're in. And once you understand that, everything's fine. But generally speaking, I found that I was able to pretty much get a real feel for what the place was going to be like. And also with the satellite view, I was able to see the area and what was around nearby. And one particularly had a pub right next door, another one had a slurry farm behind it, and so on and so on. And you just think, right, that's off the list. And so in actual fact, what happened was the very first house, because we had a list, we had sort of 6 or 7 on the list, and we went to see them all in one day. And the one that was top of our list was the one we first booked in first, and that's the one we made the offer on. Is that typical now? Is that... And I felt a bit guilty. Oh my God, the first house I looked at was the one I chose. But when I think about it, I spent 10 days to nearly 2 weeks on the various portals in advance of that, doing the groundwork and getting rid of the no-hopers in the comfort of my own home, as opposed to going round and seeing them from a newspaper ad. Does that resonate?
Yes, I mean, the portals have obviously advanced marketing greatly, especially with, as you say, satellite views, street views, and generally walk-ins, cameras that are giving you a walk through a property, and you can get a feel if it's going to be, but you're still going to go in those things. I've always said, and we've spoken about this many times, and I'm still an advocate of that. And it'll be an interesting question to ask you, actually, because you're going through that. When you went out to look at these properties, you had 6 on your list. What were the pointers that, apart from that you'd done the research, when you were driving around and you got to those addresses and you looked at them from the outside, or what was your first take on those houses? What made you decide that you want to, or you probably don't want to? Tell me about that, your experience of that, share that.
Yeah, well, that's where the satellite view and the street view came in, because, one of them we kind of knew, and it was right next to a secondary school, and we booked it for 3:30.
Right.
So parking outside the house was near impossible, because there was a line of mums with their Chelsea tractors all waiting to pick up the little darlings at 16 years old. And we knew that might be the problem. And so, to be honest with you, when the agent turned up to do the viewing, we kind of already made our mind up before we'd even gone inside that was not going to be an option, because twice a day there was going to be parking issues, and kids everywhere, and whatever goes along with that. And, that wasn't going to be part of what our remit was going to be. So we were able to to some extent, check the area out in advance. As I said about the pub and the slurry farm, they were two different ones. That beautiful, beautiful houses, and again, you could tell why they'd spent so much money doing them up, because they had an issue with the location. So the house was almost irresistible inside. It was gorgeous in one particular instance, but it was literally adjoining a pub garden on the other side of your garden.
So take me
So
through
you're
the
able to
journey
get
of
rid of
your,
that without going. So
yeah. So take me through the journey of your drive there. And as you already knew that it was next to a school, you already knew that those 2 times were going to be a difficult thing. But when you got there, had you already made that up as your mind, or why did you go? What made you sort of think, well, actually, I know that there's trouble, but I want to go and look at it anyway. So
yeah,
what was that
yeah.
about?
That was because the price was attractive and the interior was reasonable. And we thought, well, let's have a look at what the low end of the market is. We'd had a sort of price bracket that we were looking in. So this looked like, on the face of it, it was providing good value for money. And that was probably one of the reasons why it was priced the way it was, alongside the fact that actually the square footage, when you looked at it, it was one of those things where it was a nice double fronted, but it wasn't very deep. So and a relatively modern house as a result. So you could then tell why it was priced the way it was. So, but again, you want to go and have a look and see what the cheap end looks like as opposed to what the top end of your budget looks like. So we were able to pretty much define what it was that we were looking for and rule out quite a lot before we started, which was very, very helpful indeed, in actual fact. The other thing I was going to say was the difference in agents is extraordinary in terms of people showing you around.
Right.
And if you go with an agent, I mean, you don't get a choice really, obviously, when you're looking to buy, because it's on with an agent and it's on with that agent whether you like it or not. But the number of when I went round with an agent that was from where they owned their own agency, an independent, in other words, completely different experience to when I went round with one of the chains and some young person who really, every question, I don't know, I'd have to check that out. I don't know, I have to check that out. They hadn't even met the vendor, and they had nothing to do with the house, whereas the lady who happened to be shown as the house we chose in the end was working for an independent who'd been there for 30, 40 years and still on the high street and still got the shop. She knew them personally. In fact, her sister lived the other side of the fence. So and that's probably why they got the instruction, I would imagine. And therefore, the whole process was so much easier and so much more convincing. And it is extraordinary how, and I'm sorry to keep mentioning the word young all the time, but it was the younger end of the market that are working in a PAYE job, as it were. And actually, that's not being fair to them, because the other lady was working PAYE, but she had skin in the game. She was there, she was there with experience. She knew how to show us round. She knew how to leave us when we wanted to be left. But we could have easily have done the other viewings with chain agents without anybody being there, because they provided nothing to the experience.
Very important, isn't it, really, to know that the biggest purchase that you're always going to do in your life has got to be with someone that has some experience, knowledge, understanding, know the area, know the type of property, and get to know you actually before they even get to there. Talk to you, decide what what you're looking for, and so forth. And that's why some weeks back we went through a scenario where we were asking the question about the type of agencies and what it is. And I said at the time, the problem with most of them is that it's now mostly digitized. So you get a inquiry, and the next thing you know is you're going to get an email of the details, and the next thing you know is someone's done an automated call to you, and you've done everything is automated. There is no real touchy-feely scenario that exists in that business, and it is the ones that have been perhaps like me or Guy, or people who have have longevity in that, when they actually pick up the phone and say, tell me what you're looking for, tell me, talk me through what your wishes are. Oh, and by the way, I think I've got the one for you because it's in such and such Acacia Avenue. And even if we didn't get 100% of it, we probably get 90% of it right. And then you go there and you say, okay, well, yes, that's all good, but there was a bit of this. Okay, we learned from that, and then the next one you go to another one. But yes, today is too automated, and therefore it's not the way it was. So that is the only minus with the portals, because those portals generate so much information that the actual sellers, the negotiators, and the staff almost don't have to, or they feel they don't have to sell, because the picture paints 1,000 words. You look at it and you go, right, okay, well, that's street view, that's got these, the satellite view, that's got the internal, that's got the walkthrough. And so really what they feel they've got to do is open the door and let you walk it through. No sell. But when you're that level, whether it's 500, 200, or 2 million, you still want someone to walk you around it and just to, and the secret always in that is, from my experience, has been that you arrive a bit earlier and do the walkabout. If you've never been there first, at least you go there 15, 20 minutes earlier, stand before them and walk the house so you know what the flow of the house is going to be. It's the sort of thing I'd probably do. Whereas somebody that is now perhaps just working off the digital world will just turn up, open the door and go, there you go. And then you think, right, where shall I go? And that's because they feel that the portals have done all their work for them. And then on the way out, they'll just say, well, thank you very much. Let me know if you want to make me an offer. Whereas another person, someone with experience and knowledge and feeling, and as you say, and I always use that word, that's got skin in the game, will actually stand there and say, you know what, let me walk you through, then let you walk around, and then you come back and say, tell me the things you liked or disliked about it, and did it feel good? So you have that conversation, and that's the one you're going to get akin to, because next time that person phones you, you're going to take their call and say, well, actually, I knew Sarah. I met her at such and such Acacia Avenue. She was the one that knew what we wanted, but the other chap didn't. So people buy people first, don't they?
Yeah, last observation I'll make on this because I think this is important to mention as well, which is really interesting because there was another. Interestingly, all 6 houses were with different people, so we had the choice of 6 different people showing us around who were working for a variety of agents. Some of them were the one that we bought from was the one that was an individual office based in one town. The other ones were a mixture of chains across the UK, and then there was, or certainly across the south, and then maybe chains of maybe 2 or 3 offices in a certain region. And one of those particular agencies, the chap that came to see us, when we said this wasn't the sort of property, and we'd chosen to see it, but we said this really wasn't what we were looking for after all, he was the only one of the 6 who then turned around and said, right, can I just take a moment while we're here just to ask you what it is that you really are looking for? And he made notes of what we said, so we don't want to be overlooked. We don't want this. We don't want that. We want to be detached, 4 bedrooms, etc. And he was the only one who asked us what we were looking for. And he said, well, based on what you've just told me, I do have 2 other properties. Could you, as soon as you're here for the day, could you squeeze in 2 more at the end of the day? We went, yes, of course we will. So we went and saw 8 in the end because we'd only chosen 6, but we saw 8, one of which was on our original long list. And we went to see that because we were interested to see it, but we probably were going to rule it out, and we did. But then another one was one that was literally about to go on the portal within a couple of days. So we got to see something before it even got made up. It didn't turn out to be quite right, but it was close. But he was the only one who did any kind of fact-finding, which I find astonishing.
Well, that's experience speaking for you, and that's why I said to you that's the way the world has changed. It has changed not for the better in that sense, whereas it's the biggest purchase that you actually mentally and physically and financially make. Whether you're a first-time buyer and it's your first home, or whether it's your 10th home, it is the largest amount of money you will spend, and you need someone to hold your hand through it. It may not be the right place, it may not be the right questions, but that person that actually took the time to talk to you, not only did he not utilize his time effectively, but he also made you feel special by saying, you know what, I've got a couple of others while you're here. Is it possible that you want to look at that? Because that's good marketing, that's good selling of himself. And that doesn't exist, unfortunately, because so much information is now available that it almost takes away the fact that somebody needs to what a robot now, in all honesty, could do that job very easy. And that's why people are suffering, because they're not actually trained to be personalized to try and achieve what somebody is like. Okay, you're going to get tire kickers, you're going to get time wasters, we know that. That's something that is part of the game. but you've got to be in it to win it. If you don't go out there to sell to them, you're not going to sell to them. And if you've made that first impression, the wrong impression, then of course immediately they're not going to come back to you to buy. They'll go to the person that made the effort, like you did. The question I was asking at the beginning of it was that when you're driving to a property and you turned up there, what was the deciding factor, as apart from what you analyzed? What were you thinking? What made you think that it was an area that you wanted to be in, or what an area that you didn't want to be in?
Well, on the other side of the road was the New Forest. Literally, is on the other side of the road, and you can access that. So, and that is protected land, so there's nothing going to be built opposite. So you have a view out the front, which is going to be protected. That's the first thing. But the thing that you talk about, curb appeal, the house was maintained immaculately. The drive was really clean and well presented. Space for 4 cars. The house looked clean and well maintained, and certainly a very quiet cul-de-sac neighbourhood. So that really ticked all of the boxes from a curb appeal point of view. But yes, it had been maintained well in and out.
So when you did your satellite view and you did your, all your portal research, street view, and so forth, was the first impression of that an important impression, or was it the inside that was actually more important to you?
Yeah, well, it's always the inside that gets me first, because I'm looking at what I could, how comfortable I could be in there. But then very quickly, I have to look at the outside. So to give you an idea, the one next door to the pub was by far and away my favourite property, and still is. But the fact that I've got a neighbouring shared wall with a pub garden, it's just not a thing. So it's not going to happen. So that was
You could have had a hatch put in there, Paul.
yes. and when I then, and of course I did some research, as you might expect. I went on their Facebook page for the pub, and guess what? In the summer they have live bands all through the summer. So you can imagine what the garden was going to be like in the summer.
Well, that's a regular gig for you. I just can't understand that you didn't actually add that up and thought, hang on a minute, I could be grooving next door. I could have a hat for my pint and perfect. Hey presto. But anyway,
in actual fact, this house we chose, there is a school probably 400-500 yards away. It's only a little first school, small one. And I went there yesterday at chucking out time and going in time, just to see how far the line of cars goes out. And that's just something I've always done. For example, if I've got any concerns like a Saturday night, I'll go back there on a Saturday at 8 o'clock, and I'll see what the sort of cars is outside, if there's any noise, what the traffic across the road is at that time of night on a Saturday, or whenever I think the time might be important, depending on where the location is. And I've often, wherever I've bought a property, I've always gone and done something like that. So yesterday was the day where I went and checked just how bad the school car park line gets, and it doesn't get quite to the property, so everything was fine. But that would be a tip from me in terms of my experience of it, is always do that due diligence, look at the satellite picture, go and have a drive round, find out where the nearest, Sainsbury's or Tesco's or whatever it is you're going to look for, where the superstore is, how far away is it, where's the train station, all of those things, all of which you've advised in the past, of course. I learnt from the best.
Yeah.
But getting back to our last points, they are saying that houses are taking longer to sell at Rightmove, and they're saying that the national average time now is 61 days, which is up 1 day on last month. Now, I'm getting a bit confused here, because we've seen and we've quoted surveys saying it's 120, and I saw one last week, 150 days to sell a property. So I'm not too sure whether this is 61 seems very quick.
Well, the reality of it is that we know the conveyancing system it's just not working well. I mean, it's archaic. Can't see how it is. Lots of people come into it and try and sort of disrupt it and say we can do this, but the end of the line is the same. It gets stuck. And if they take on a lot of work, there's got, loads of files, it just doesn't happen. So, and, the priorities are not there. The staff leveling is not there. The automation now is more. And unfortunately, it's not something that I think will get fixed in a heartbeat going forward. It is unfortunately what it is, and especially if you've got unusual concepts, and there have been many different types of concepts. Leasehold is one, common hold is another, freehold is one. They've got to get their heads around all of those things and understand that what takes the time. So of course, my dad, when we were younger, always said, only buy freehold. And because you own it, or it's freehold, you don't have a service charge on it, etc. In hindsight, they probably were right. They had their experiences, but the world has changed. We don't want, and we can't all afford the freeholds. The prices are absolutely, astronomical. So you end up buying flats, and of course, the flats have had history, especially with cladding and the Glenfield scenario and so forth. So everyone gets the jitters, not only the buyer, the seller, but also the legals, because they want to make sure that they've covered everything, so that they are not liable at any stage to say they didn't give you that information. They didn't uncover the fact that it might have been one that had some issue with cladding or building or structure or any of those things. So to get that information, it gets a lot, takes time. But I'm going to use an analogy about a full service on a car. Now, if you imagine that you have a nice car and you take it back to the dealership and it has the stamps of whenever it got serviced, whether it was a service A, B, C, or D, MOT, and you got all of that data collected because you value that car, you love it, you drive it, and you want to make sure that when you come to sell it, you're going to get the best value because you've created a dossier, a file, and you've got the two keys, you haven't got the one key, you haven't, it's all there. And those are the buy-ins for a nice car. If people actually did the same dossier for their property, they would actually reduce the amount of time that it takes, because any seller that would have done any work during that period would keep the receipts for the boiler service, would keep the receipts for the roof that was repaired, all of those things, just in the same way as one does for perhaps selling their motor vehicle. And then if they were to pass that dossier to their solicitor at the time of a sale, that solicitor's work is cut in by half, and therefore your transaction can vote. Not only that, when you go to view a property, and if the seller actually on the kitchen surface opens a file and says to you, Paul, thank you for coming and having a look at my house. Just to share with you the history of this house since we bought it. We bought it on such and such date and such time. And here are the pictures of what we bought it with. And here are the pictures that is currently. And here is all the documents and the receipts to show what we have done to the property in the time that we've done. How would that make you feel?
Yeah, no, it is exactly that, isn't it? It's the same as, when you good service history and all the rest of it on cars. It's exactly the same thing, and that's where you can, harden the price when you're doing the negotiation. Last point they're making, as we're pressed for time here, but interestingly, this leads on to the other subject that we must just touch on before we close today, and that is the affordability pressures on buyers. So, they're saying that obviously, mortgages are considerably more expensive than they were this time last year. But of course, this last week, and we can't finish without mentioning it, we did get a 0.25% base rate cut, which of course was a surprise to you, I suspect, because you were thinking there wouldn't be one. And certainly after the budget, we both thought there wouldn't be one. But there has been a cut now to, 4.75, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, I am surprised that they made that cut. Obviously, it's good news for home buyers and those who are taking mortgages. You can't take that away. Every opportunity is a good opportunity. I was a little surprised that the budget that we were given was a bit of a bloodbath to the housing market. Not as full as it is going to come, but it's coming. I'm fairly certain that capital gains tax will go up next year because they're still going to need to raise more money. And I think the inflation rate will probably go up after Christmas. And that may mean that they may not be cuts. They may mean that they will actually start to think about putting it up. And I was trying not to have a false base, really. That's where my thought was, that if it is at 5% and the swap rates meant that, they could get fixed rates at 3.75 or whatever, that allowed first time buyers to still step into the market and then not have to think about, the rates going up and down in general. However, it is what it is, and I think the budget wasn't that exciting. Most people are still sitting on their hands and not sure about where it's going. Mr. Trump has now come in, and that's created another vacuum that we'll probably feel sometime next year. I've never seen so many world leaders shaking in their boots, based on the fact that this one man has come back. And I say some of the biggest and the best world leaders have actually, stopped and thought about if America sneezes, who catches the cold. But in this case, if Mr. Trump is going to sneeze, the whole world is going to catch a cold. So all of those things are still in the background. They're waiting to come out. It comes in January, whenever he does. We'll see what happens. But it's important to Britain what happens. And it's going to be more important to our homeowners, because that's the best amount of money we ever spend. That's our ultimate aim. We look every day to go and buy our first home.
So briefly, just to finish up with then, what do we think about 2025? We've had an interest rate cut. There may even be one in a month's time. And I know you're not too positive about that, but there might be one in another month's time, which could bring us down to 4.5. So what do you think? Are we set for a good 2025?
I think they're trying to motivate. Yeah, I think they're trying to motivate a good 2025. I'm not against that at all. Obviously, we're in the business, so we want it to be as bullish and as brilliant as it possibly can be. But everybody's going in there with a caution, and the caution is that there are still things that are outstanding that they haven't done. There's still the renters reform bill that's still kicking around. There's still problems with the buy-to-let market. There's still problems with people sort of saying, what am I going to do for this capital gains? There's still the question of stamp duty in March, because that stamp duty could go back to normal. I believe that they probably won't go back to normal. I think they'll extend it. So cautious but optimistic is my answer.
And that's a good note to end on today's Property Matters. Join us again very soon.